You spend your life reaching, trying to earn what should have always been yours. A kind word, a safe place, a love that stays. You bend, contort, give too much. And when it doesn't come, you wonder if something in you is broken. But what if the one who chases is the one who doesn't yet feel worthy? And what if the moment you stop chasing, you finally become still enough to receive? Because love, real love, doesn't come when you run toward it. It comes when you return to the place you abandoned to be chosen. There was a time I didn't know what I needed, only that I needed something. So I reached. I reached with smiles, with silence, with soft apologies for existing too loudly. I thought it was love I was reaching for, but looking back, it was something deeper, something older. It was belonging, safety, a place to rest without being asked to shrink. And I thought if I reached far enough, if I became good enough, quiet enough, pleasing enough, love would arrive and save me. But love that must be earned is never love. It's approval, wearing a costume. And so I spent years mistaking hunger for devotion. I chased people who could not see me, trying to be seen. I gave too much in places where nothing was ever returned, and still I called it love, because I didn't yet know what love actually felt like when it wasn't mixed with fear. I thought the ache meant I cared. I thought the ache was the proof. But the ache was the absence, the reaching was the symptom, and the hunger was the part of me I'd long forgotten how to feed myself, the part that needed gentleness, needed truth, needed to be chosen, not by another, but by me. Because here's what I've learned: the chase never ends in love. It ends in exhaustion. You run in circles trying to become enough for someone who was never meant to define you. And all the while you drift further from the part of you that was whole before you started reaching. There's nothing wrong with wanting connection. But when the desire becomes a pursuit, when the pursuit becomes a pattern, and when the pattern becomes your identity, you forget yourself. You forget how to rest. You forget how to receive. You forget that real love doesn't need to be convinced. It comes when you return to your own hands, your own voice, your own quiet knowing. Because love is not something you chase, it's something you remember. And the moment you stop chasing, you begin to hear what the hunger was actually trying to tell you. I miss me. And from that place, something shifts. Not outside, but within. A small, steady presence begins to rise. Not loud, not grand, but real. And for the first time, you begin to realize what you were reaching for was never out there. It was the forgotten self waiting at the edge of your own attention. I used to smile even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. It was a habit, automatic, effortless, praised. They called me kind, compassionate, easy to be around. But what they really meant was, you make us comfortable, you don't ask for much, you keep your ache quiet. And I believed that was love. I thought if I could just keep pleasing, I'd stay needed. And if I stayed needed, I wouldn't be left. So I made myself small, agreeable, soft around the edges. Even when everything inside me screamed for space, for voice, for truth, pleasing became my armor. But like all armor, it was heavy. And over time, I began to forget what it felt like to simply exist without shaping myself around others. The smile stayed, but behind it, there was an ache. A quiet, constant ache, the ache of not being fully known, the ache of watching people love the mask, while the real me sat in the corner hoping to be chosen too. But no one can love the parts you hide, and no one can hear the voice you keep swallowing. So I learned to notice every time I said yes when I meant maybe, every time I nodded when I wanted to speak, every time I softened what should have been a boundary. It wasn't kindness, it was fear. Fear that my full self might be too much, too intense, too inconvenient to keep close. But you cannot be loved for who you are if you never show who that is. You cannot belong while constantly auditioning. So I started with a small question. What am I afraid will happen if I stop pleasing? Will they leave? Will they change? Will they love me less? And the deeper truth came gently. Maybe. But maybe I'll finally love myself more, because the smile I wore wasn't mine. It was borrowed. It was survival. And survival doesn't ask what you want. It asks what will keep you safe. But I don't want safe anymore. I want real. And real love begins where the mask ends. So I'm learning to smile only when I mean it, to speak even if my voice shakes, to risk being misunderstood in order to be honest. And with each moment of truth, the ache lessens, not because the world changes, but because I do. Because I've decided that I am worthy of being without the performance, worthy of presence, even when I'm not pleasing. And slowly, that smile becomes something new, not a shield, but a reflection of a self that no longer hides. There's a goodbye I still carry, not the kind that happens with suitcases or slamming doors, but the kind that unfolds in silence, slow, invisible, unspoken. A withdrawal I couldn't name at the time, a presence that began to dim, a warmth that faded before I understood why it ever mattered. It may have come from a parent, a friend, a first love, or maybe from all of them, in different forms, but it always left the same shape behind, absence. And into that absence I poured questions. What did I do? What should I have been? Was I not enough? Or somehow too much? I didn't know then that when love leaves too soon, it doesn't just take comfort, it takes clarity. And so the child within me began to guess her way back to connection. She learned to perform, to soothe, to avoid anything that might trigger another leaving. Because when goodbye is never explained, you turn your entire life into a prevention plan. You shape yourself around the people who stay, hoping they never glimpse the part of you that someone else once walked away from. But abandonment, even quiet, even subtle, leaves an imprint. It teaches you to chase love as if it lives outside of you. And that imprint follows you. It shows up in relationships that feel too familiar, in the way you lean in too fast, in the way you stay too long, in the way you explain yourself when no one even asked. Because the first goodbye wasn't just a loss, it was a lesson, and that lesson became your language. But you are not a child anymore, and the story doesn't have to end where it began. You can name the goodbye now. You can feel what you couldn't feel then. You can sit with the ache without making it your identity. Because healing isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about letting the shape that loss left behind be filled with something new. Not another person, not a perfect ending, but your own presence, the kind of presence that says to that abandoned part of you, I'm still here and I'm not going anywhere. The moment you stop asking someone else to fix the echo, you begin to quiet it yourself, not by forgetting, but by remembering, with compassion instead of blame. And over time, the goodbye becomes something softer, not a wound, but a turning point, not a scar, but a door. And through that door walks a version of you who no longer builds love on the fear of being left, but on the truth of having never truly left yourself. I used to think disappearing was a gift, a way of keeping the peace, of staying small enough to fit into places that weren't made for all of me. It wasn't dramatic. No one told me to vanish. They just responded better when I wasn't too loud, too curious, too emotional, too real. So I adjusted. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I agreed with opinions that felt wrong in my chest. I silenced the truth I carried because truth can make people uncomfortable, and I was already afraid of being left. That's how it began. Not with one big moment, but 100 small choices to be less visible in order to be more loved. And it worked, or at least I thought it did, because people stayed. But they didn't stay for me. They stayed for the version of me who never made them confront themselves. And I stayed for the illusion that I was finally safe. But safety that costs you yourself is not safety. It's sacrifice. And over time, I forgot how to be real. I forgot how to say what I meant without checking the room first. I forgot how to want something without apologizing for needing it. Because somewhere along the line, I made a silent agreement. If I disappear just enough, they'll love me enough. But disappearing isn't love, it's survival. And love should never require you to erase yourself to keep it. Still, I don't blame that younger version of me. She did what she had to do. She watched what got rewarded, what got ignored, what got punished, and she learned the rules. But I'm not her anymore. And the love I long for now doesn't ask me to vanish. It asks me to stay, to take up space, to speak, to be seen. That kind of love begins inside, when I stop editing myself to be palatable, when I stop asking for permission to exist fully, and when I do, something sacred happens. The people who only love the silence begin to drift, and that's okay. Because silence is no longer my offering, presence is, and the ones who stay now, they don't ask me to shrink, they don't celebrate my disappearance, they meet me where I actually live. In the truth, in the whole, in the voice I used to hide. So now I return to the parts of me I left behind in rooms that only knew how to love my absence. And I remind them, you don't have to disappear anymore. You were never too much. There was simply not enough space. Somewhere along the way, I learned to call emptiness normal. I learned that wanting too much was dangerous, that asking for more meant risking everything I already had. So I settled for crumbs, for attention that came with conditions, for connections that left me lonelier than being alone ever did. And over time, that became the pattern. Not because I loved the ache, but because the ache was familiar. And familiar feels like safety, even when it starves you. I told myself this is just how love works, that it's meant to be earned, that I should be grateful for what I get, even when it doesn't nourish me. But that wasn't truth. That was training. Somewhere in childhood, in early relationships, in quiet heartbreaks, never spoken aloud. I was taught that love comes in rations, that affection must be bought with silence, that presence must be earned through perfection, that my needs were too much for anyone to hold. So I became smaller, less vocal, more adaptable, and I learned how to survive on scraps of love while pretending I was full. But survival isn't the same as living. And what I know now is this. When you've been trained to starve, wholeness feels overwhelming. You flinch at consistency, you question kindness, you sabotage intimacy because part of you still believes you're not allowed to have it. You weren't taught to receive. You were taught to reach, and reach, and reach. So when someone offers love without asking for your sacrifice, you freeze. Not because you don't want it, but because you don't know where to put it. But here's the truth. Patterns are not prophecy. What you repeat is not who you are. It's who you learn to be. And just as you were trained to expect too little, you can begin unlearning it, slowly, tenderly, without shame. You can start to ask, what would it feel like to stop reaching, to sit in the hunger without calling it neediness, to trust that love doesn't always have to be chased. It won't be comfortable. Your nervous system will resist. The old stories will rise. But that's the work, to remind the body and the heart. You're allowed to be full. You're allowed to stop starving, because real love doesn't come when you've earned it. It comes when you remember you've never had to. You were not meant to live on fragments of affection. You were made to feel held, not just tolerated. And the pattern that kept you hungry, it can end with you. Not with rage, not with blame, but with the quiet decision to stop mistaking pain for proof that you care. You don't need to ache to be alive. You just need to stay present, open, worthy. I used to think the people I was drawn to were chosen by fate, some cosmic force pulling me toward the ones who could complete me, the ones who would finally see me, hold me, stay. But now I understand. What I saw in them was a reflection of what I longed to see in myself. Their attention made me feel worthy. Their silence made me question my value. Their presence gave me purpose. Their distance unraveled me. It wasn't them. It was the mirror. Because we're always drawn to something familiar. And sometimes what's familiar isn't what's healthy, it's what's unfinished. I kept finding the same kind of love in different bodies. Love that made me reach, made me shrink, made me doubt myself so I could feel chosen again. But the truth? They weren't choosing me. They were reflecting me. The parts of me that felt unworthy. The places in me I didn't know how to love. The silence I carried inside that begged to be filled by someone else. And so I chased connection not because I was incomplete, but because I had forgotten how to meet myself. That's the secret the mirror hides. It's not about them, it's about you. You seek the tenderness you won't give yourself, the acceptance you withhold from your own reflection, the presence you've been taught to expect only from others. But no one can love you into wholeness if you keep abandoning yourself to be loved. Eventually I stopped asking, why don't they see me? And started asking, why do I keep giving my light to people who only see their shadow in me? Because when someone cannot love you deeply, it is not always about your depth, but their reflection. And when you try to fix yourself to keep them close, you are mistaking their discomfort for your deficiency. So I turned inward, not to blame myself, but to meet the one who kept reaching outside for what could only grow inside. It's not about rejecting others, it's about recognizing where you keep outsourcing love to people who were never meant to hold it. You don't need to be mirrored to be real. You don't need their eyes to prove your worth, because the mirror isn't out there. It's in the way you look at yourself when no one's watching. And the moment you offer yourself what you've begged others to give, you become whole enough to love without need, without ache, without leaving yourself behind. That's when the reflection shifts. That's when the world stops echoing your fear and begins to mirror your truth, because you finally remembered how to see yourself first. There were times I swore I was in love. I felt it in my chest, tight and full, in my stomach, twisting, alive, in my mind, spinning stories of forever. But now, when I look back, I wonder, was it love or was it longing? Because real love feels spacious, safe, steady. What I felt was more like ache, like hunger disguised as hope, a reaching, not a resting. It wasn't built on presence. It was built on potential, not on being seen, but on being needed. I told myself they were the one, that I'd never felt anything like this, that the intensity meant truth. But sometimes intensity is just familiar pain in a new costume, because longing wears many faces. It can look like desire. It can sound like fate. It can feel like home when you've been raised in absence. And I confused the ache for affection, the chaos for chemistry, the pull for purpose. But love doesn't need to pull. It arrives. It stays. It breathes with you, not through you. And the longing I mistook for love wasn't about them. It was about the part of me that still believed I had to earn connection through sacrifice. That part of me didn't want a partner. It wanted resolution. Closure for the unmet needs of a younger self who still stood by the door, waiting to be chosen. So I turned people into possibilities, into saviors, into stories. But people aren't stories. And when you love from longing, you don't see the person, you see the projection. You shape yourself to fit a role in a play they never auditioned for, and then grieve when the performance ends without applause. What I thought was love was a return to something incomplete, not a new chapter, but a loop. And loops don't end until you step outside them. I don't shame the longing. It taught me what I still needed. It brought me closer to the places in myself that were still waiting for warmth. But I don't chase it anymore, because now I know. Not all desire is truth. Some of it is memory, some of it is fantasy, some of it is pain that wants to be held, not repeated. Love doesn't erupt, it unfolds. And I don't need to ache to prove it's real. I just need to be present with what is. Without the script, without the craving, without the illusion, because when love finally arrives, without the shape of longing, it may be quieter, but it will feel like peace. And peace was what I was searching for all along. There's a moment in every journey when the effort breaks, when the striving, the fixing, the chasing, all fall silent. Not because you found what you were looking for, but because something inside you has finally grown tired of running. At first, it feels like failure, like defeat, like the last thread of hope has unraveled and left you standing in a room you don't recognize. But this collapse, it's sacred, because beneath the noise, beneath the reaching, beneath the endless effort to become lovable, there is something still, something ancient, something quiet, something real, the self, not the self you perform, not the self shaped by memory, by mirrors, by the expectations of people who never truly saw you, but the original, the one who remembers, the one who waits, and it takes the collapse to hear her. Because when we're busy chasing love, we drown out the voice that already holds it. We run past the parts of us that were never lost, only left behind. And when the chasing ends, not in triumph, but in surrender, that voice rises, softly. She doesn't scold you for forgetting. She doesn't shame you for the patterns. She simply begins to speak, not with answers, but with presence. You don't have to become, she says, you already are. And those words don't land like motivation. They land like memory, a remembering of something deeper than identity or role, a truth not given to you by others, but carried inside you all along. The collapse isn't the end of the story, it's the turning point, the undoing of all that was built on fear, on performance, on the ache to be enough. It strips you bare, yes, but only so you can see what was never lacking. Stillness is what comes after the storm. It's not emptiness, it's clarity. And in that clarity you begin to see you were never too much. You were just surrounded by people who didn't know how to hold depth. You were never unworthy. You were simply trained to question your own value until someone else confirmed it. But now, you are the confirmation. You are the presence you kept searching for in others. And in this stillness, you can finally breathe, not because everything is fixed, but because you're no longer fixing yourself to earn something that was never meant to be bought. This is where the real self begins to speak, not in volume, but in truth. And all it asks is this: stay. Stay long enough to hear the wisdom that lives beneath the noise. Stay long enough to become without becoming anyone else. For so long, I believed love had to come from outside me, that someone else would arrive and build the safety I could never seem to find on my own. I waited for that presence, that certainty, that promise. You're okay now. I've got you. But the longer I waited, the more I realized what I was longing for wasn't a person. It was a feeling I'd never been taught to create. Safety. Not physical safety, but the kind that lets you rest. The kind that doesn't ask you to perform. The kind that whispers, you can just be. And what no one told me is that this kind of safety is not something anyone else can give. It's something you grow inside yourself, slowly, tenderly, like a garden that's been dry for years and finally feels rain. At first, it's foreign. You second guess it. You wonder if it's real, if it will last, if it belongs to you. But you water it anyway, not with force, with care. You start by listening to your body, to the no's you've ignored, to the yeses you've been afraid to say. You learn to sit with discomfort without judging yourself. You offer compassion to the younger parts who still flinch at love, even when it's kind. And with time, the soil softens. You stop needing permission to exist. You stop shrinking around others' expectations. You stop outsourcing your worth to people who never had the capacity to hold it, because now you hold it. You become the space where love can grow. Not love for others, that comes later, but love for yourself. The kind that doesn't fade when you make mistakes. The kind that stays even when the world doesn't. And from that place, everything shifts. You begin to choose differently, not out of fear, but from wholeness. You no longer chase what wounds you. You no longer beg for scraps. You no longer confuse tension for connection. Instead, you soften. You expand. You learn that love isn't a transaction, it's a state of being, a way of relating to yourself, to your past, to your silence. And when someone enters that space, you don't ask them to build it for you. You invite them in as an equal, because the garden is already growing, and you no longer fear being left. Not because no one will leave, but because you finally know you'll stay. With yourself, with your truth, with the love you've always deserved, but are only now learning how to give. There was a time I believed I was incomplete, a fragment, a half-heart waiting for its mirror, a soul that would only make sense when someone else arrived to finish the sentence. I built my identity around the absence, around the missing. And so every connection felt like hope, a chance to be made whole again. But that belief was never truth. It was a wound disguised as longing, because the idea that we are only whole in union is a beautiful story, but it can be a dangerous one too. It teaches us to wait, to search, to give our power away in the name of love. And what I've come to understand is this: I was never missing, only mistaken. Mistaken about where to look, mistaken about what love was meant to do, mistaken in believing that I needed someone else to grant me access to my own soul. The truth is quieter, but it's always been there. Wholeness was never lost. It was buried beneath the parts of me I was told to suppress, the emotions I was taught to fear, the voice I learned to silence to keep the peace. And every time I gave myself away to be accepted, another piece went into hiding, not gone, just waiting, just watching, just hoping I'd return before the world taught me to forget myself entirely. So I began the slow work of calling those pieces back, the fierce one, the gentle one, the wild, uncertain, curious, tender one, not to become someone new, but to remember who I was before I believed I was broken. And piece by piece, the lie began to fade. The lie that said I was too much. The lie that said I was not enough. The lie that said I had to earn what was already mine. Because wholeness is not earned, it is revealed. And it reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in the quiet, when you're finally brave enough to sit with yourself. No distractions, no validation, no mirror, but your own. That's when you feel it. Not as a spark, but as a steady flame. You are never a half waiting to be completed. You are a whole, learning to return. To the self, to the center, to the love that doesn't depend on someone else staying. And when you meet another from that place, when your wholeness meets theirs, that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of something real, not need, not ache, but recognition. Because they are not your other half, they are your mirror, and you no longer need them to fill you. You just want them to meet you, fully, as you are. There's a moment when you realize you've been walking away from yourself in search of something you were never truly without. It happens slowly. You trace the path of your choices, the people you followed, the places you tried to belong, and somewhere along the way you see it. You left yourself to be loved, not out of weakness, but out of hope. Out of the belief that maybe if you just moved far enough from who you were, someone would finally stay, and they might have, for a while. But the love that found you when you were far from yourself was never real, because it wasn't you they loved, it was the version you created to be acceptable. And that kind of love feels more like abandonment than connection, because every time they chose you, you knew deep down it wasn't really you they saw, so you left again and again, until even you couldn't find the pieces of yourself you'd scattered in other people's approval. But no one can live disconnected forever. Eventually, the ache becomes too loud, the mask too heavy, the silence too sharp. And that's when it begins. The return, not to a place, but to a presence, a breath, a remembering. You stop running, not because you've reached the end, but because you finally realized you were never lost. You were simply distant from your truth, from your voice, from the home inside you that never stopped waiting. And when you come back, it doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like exhale, like the moment your feet touch ground after floating for too long. You start to hear yourself again, not the fear, not the echo of old wounds, but the self beneath all of it, the one who never needed to be chosen to matter, the one who knows how to hold love without leaving herself to do it. And here's the grace. The moment you stop leaving yourself, love returns. Not always from others, not right away, but from within. You begin to move differently, speak differently, choose differently. You stop apologizing for needing space. You stop shrinking when you feel joy. You stop making yourself small just to stay close to someone who doesn't know how to hold your depth. Because now you are the one who stays. And that changes everything, not because life gets easier, but because you are no longer an exile in your own body. You've come home, and nothing, not absence, not rejection, not the longing that used to lead you, can pull you away again. Not now, not when you finally remembered that the truest love begins the moment you return to you. It took me years to realize I was always trying to earn what I already deserved. Not just love, but kindness, attention, rest. Somewhere early on, I learned that nothing came freely, that affection had to be earned through effort, that being seen meant being useful, that my value was conditional, and I had to keep proving it over and over again. So I did. I became helpful, supportive, safe. The one who listened, who showed up, who never asked for too much in return. And for a while it worked. People stayed. They praised the version of me who made everything easier for them. But deep inside I was tired, not just from the doing, but from the pretending. Pretending I didn't also need. Pretending I didn't also ache to be met, held, received. Because when you spend your life earning love, you forget what it feels like to simply receive it. You question every kind gesture. You scan every compliment for hidden motives. You wait for the moment it's taken back, as if receiving without earning is some kind of mistake the world will correct at any second. But it isn't. It never was. Love doesn't have to be bought, and worth doesn't have to be proven. Your existence is not a performance. Your softness is not a weakness. Your needs are not a burden. They are human. They are sacred. They are allowed. You were never meant to hustle for your humanity. So I started to unlearn the hustle, not by doing nothing, but by letting go of the belief that doing is what makes me lovable. I began to say thank you without apology, to let people care for me without repayment, to feel the warmth of being chosen without bracing for the catch. And at first it felt foreign, like I hadn't earned it yet, like I should do something to deserve it more. But I stayed. I let the love in, even when it was small, even when it was quiet. And little by little my nervous system softened, my walls loosened, my heart began to trust again, because this was never about them. It was about me, about the part of me that believed love was something I had to qualify for. But I don't believe that anymore. Now I let love land, not because I've done enough, but because I am enough. Now I let joy in, not because I've earned rest, but because rest is my birthright. Now I receive, not as a transaction, but as a remembering that my worth was never up for negotiation. It simply is. And that is enough. There's a kind of love that doesn't feel like a rush. It doesn't steal your breath or leave you guessing. It doesn't ask you to become someone else just to stay close. It feels like quiet recognition, like meeting a truth you've always known, but somehow forgot. And it only arrives when you've done the work of remembering yourself. Because the love you allow in can only meet you at the level of love you believe you deserve. For so long, I didn't know that. I thought I was unlucky, unseen, destined for almosts and maybes. I kept attracting mirrors, people who reflected my doubt, my scarcity, my fear of being too much or never quite enough. But I see now they weren't rejecting me. They were echoing the parts of me I was still rejecting. The universe doesn't give you what you want, it gives you what you're aligned with. And alignment begins inside. So I stopped asking, why don't they choose me? And started asking, do I truly choose me? Do I show up when I'm hurting? Do I listen when I'm tired? Do I speak even when I fear it might cost me love? Because when I began to answer yes, everything changed. I stopped chasing love that needed me to earn it. I stopped confusing intensity with intimacy. I stopped settling for relationships that only knew how to touch the surface of me. And in that space where I finally sat whole and unhidden, love arrived. Not as a rescue, but as a reflection. A meeting of two people who no longer needed fixing, but simply wanted to see and be seen. That kind of love doesn't complete you. It recognizes you. It doesn't rescue you from your solitude. It honors the home you've built there. It doesn't ask you to abandon your boundaries. It moves with reverence around them because it sees you, not just the version you show the world, but the real you, the quiet you, the full you. And it sees you because you finally learned how to see yourself. That's what real love does. It mirrors the inner work. It reflects the tenderness you've cultivated in your own heart. It speaks the same language you've been whispering to your soul in your most honest moments. And when it comes, you don't feel overwhelmed. You feel ready, not because it's perfect, but because you no longer need it to be. You've already met yourself. You've already returned home. Now, love is not a lifeline. It's a companion, not a cure, but a mirror, soft and steady, saying, I know you, because I am you. There's a stillness that comes when you no longer need to chase, not because you've stopped wanting love, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself to find it. You begin to notice the difference between movement and alignment, between chasing something and allowing something to come. For most of my life, I was always moving toward people, fitting in, reaching out, shrinking when necessary, expanding when it seemed safe. But no matter how far I reached, it always felt like love stayed just out of arm's length. And I thought maybe if I tried harder, if I became more understanding, more patient, more perfect, it would finally stay. But the more I chased, the more I lost touch with the part of me that simply wanted to be still, to be met, not pursued, not auditioned, just seen. So I began to root in my truth, in my breath, in the quiet center that had always been waiting beneath the noise of performance. And at first it was hard to stop moving, to stop proving, to sit in the silence and trust that I was enough, even if no one came running toward me. But slowly something shifted. The ache lessened, the grasping loosened, and the peace I'd always assigned to some future relationship began to bloom right where I stood. Because the deeper you root in who you are, the less you tolerate love that asks you to be somewhere else, someone else. You become the one who doesn't chase, not because you've grown cold, but because you've become clear. You know what it feels like to hold yourself, to honor your boundaries, to protect the softness that once got bruised from too much reaching. And when love finds you now, it doesn't find desperation. It finds depth. It doesn't meet performance, it meets presence. Because you are no longer moving toward love, you are standing in it. You are becoming it, rooted, open, whole. And from that place, the only love that stays is the kind that's ready to meet you exactly where you are. Not because you begged it to, but because you stopped begging. Not because you proved you were worthy, but because you stopped arguing with the truth that you always were. You no longer chase, because you know what's real will find you in the stillness, and it will stay not because you pulled it close, but because you finally became a place worth arriving. If something in this journey echoed within you, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, What part of me have I been chasing in others that's been waiting for me to return? Let it rise. Let it speak. And when it does, listen. If this stayed with you or opened something quiet and true inside, consider subscribing.